What's up, Internet? We're here to do the crystal shrimp aquarium setup. The most requested video that I get by far is how to get this tank set up, how to get it going, how to get them breeding, how to feed them, what kind of substrate should I use, what kind of plant should you use. I get all these questions all the time. We're here to answer them right now. Now, step one is to set up a decent planted aquarium. Now, it doesn't need to be anything above and beyond your abilities, but the reason why I say you should set up a planted aquarium for crystal shrimp is that setting up a planted aquarium and getting the ecosystem going on it is going to give you all the tools in order to breed a crystal shrimp. Learning how to do the water changes, learning how to get the right substrate and get the plants growing properly is going to put you on a path of success that will really encourage you to keep going with the crystal shrimp. All the failures out there that I know have been from being set up in just a basic plain old tank and ended up crashing and killing all the shrimp. The planted tank is going to give you the parameters that you're looking for in order to keep them going for a long time and not have any kind of sudden death or anything like that. Alright, so once you got your planted tank set up, we're going to move on to step two, which is to talk about feeding. Now, one of the biggest reasons for setting up a planted tank for your crystal shrimp is their primary food source is what's called biofilm. Now, biofilm is comprised of all sorts of microorganisms, basically microorganisms mixed with algae and whatnot. Now, this isn't a scientific breakdown on what biofilm is, but essentially this will be everywhere in a planted tank on all of the surfaces. So you can understand with a planted ecosystem how much surface area is going to be on all the plants here. And I managed to put together a shot of the camera flying around ridiculously. Real smooth camera skills on that. But the biofilm is going to be the primary food source for your shrimp. Now, adding in supplementary food is going to come into play once your colony starts getting big enough. Once you have a planted tank established and going, you're going to have biofilm everywhere for them to feed. And your colony is going to reach a point where you're going to have to start feeding with supplementary food. I happen to use two kinds of food. It's Shirokura shrimp pellets and Rapashi shrimp souffle. Those are the two that I use. But I generally use them very sparingly, and especially when the colony is small, and I'm talking between 10 shrimp and probably 100 shrimp. The colony is still pretty small. Currently my colony is in the thousands, as you can see from the camera going around. That's the only reason I add supplementary food. Otherwise, they're foraging all the time to find food to eat. So you really don't need to worry too much about feeding. Realistically, with my shrimp colony as big as it is now in a 240-gallon tank, I add probably 20 wafers a month to supplement the feeding to keep everybody breeding and happy. And you can notice that while I do add the shrimp pellets, they do go and feed on them. They are really not extremely interested in it otherwise. Otherwise, a lot of them are still scavenging around doing what they would normally do. Alright, now that we've got step one and step two out of the way, you're not doing any feeding, you're maintaining an ecosystem of a planted tank. Now we're kind of focus on the water parameters. It's a little bit tricky at times, but it's really not that difficult if you're maintaining your water changes. You're figuring out your water parameters because you're running a planted tank. those things should be pretty simple for you. You're not overfeeding, so ammonia is not going to be going up, and you're going to be maintaining your system. Now, optimal temperature is 68. You can range all the way from 60 to 80 degrees, but 68 is optimal for my shrimp. And all of the literature I can find is that 68 is going to be the optimal temperature from most of the other experts that I know. The pH needs to be a little bit lower than neutral. It needs to be around from 6.8 all the way down to 6.2. I keep mine at a steady 6.6 is where I keep mine. The shrimp seem to do really well right in there. If I go much higher, they get a little bit sluggish. They're not exactly the way I like to see them. But it's maintaining that which becomes an issue for a lot of people. The water that I have here to do water changes with is basically neutral. It's right at a pH of 7. So it's pretty simple. If I get anything goofy going on, I can do a big water change right out of the tap. If that's not available to you, then what you're going to have to do is get Rhody water, reverse osmosis deionized water, which is basically heavily filtered water, which will put you right in that neutral range. Now from there, you're going to have to boost the GH and the KH. I'm not going to get too in depth on those in this video because those are kind of a more technical situation, but needless to say, even when I used to do water changes with Rhody water, while maintaining a planted tank would keep my GH and KH up right in those range anyhow, so I generally didn't have to worry about it that much. It wasn't something that I had to monitor too much. But like I said, if you're running the planted tank and things are going correctly in the direction that you need to go, and you're not overfeeding, you're not going to have terrible water quality. That generally is what will kill them off. And that's another reason why I have to say you really don't want to be doing crystal shrimp in small tanks. I know that some people out there have success with it. I'm not talking about their experience. I'm talking about my experience. In the past, many years ago, we had a small tank, crystal shrimp, that were doing fantastically, and suddenly one day they all died. The small tank was just not large enough water volume to handle any kind of swing in time for us to even notice it. You can't hear the shrimp scream when they die. Oh, moving right along to probably my favorite part, breeding. Now, once you have your tank set up and your shrimp together, you're going to notice that they breed just about the same as cherry shrimp do, which means as long as you got the temperature and the parameters in play, they're going to breed like crazy. They just breed all the time. Most of you know from watching over the years in my tanks, I keep my reds and my blacks together. I keep my low grade and my high grade together. Now the reason for that is that just like in any other ecosystem out there, I want to keep as many of the genetic lines running through my shrimp as I can. Those of you that have been watching for a really long time know that I started out with around 50 black only crystal shrimp. So every single red shrimp that I have in here is a descendant of those same original 50 shrimp that I have. They all have the red gene, they all have the black gene. So what you want to aim for is, if you want to set up spare other tanks, and like sort of how I've done in the past, is plumb them all together so they all have the same water. You can get a higher water volume from running multiple tanks off of one system, and know that they're all breeding in the same water. You can start to select and cull the shrimp that are of the bad quality. Now, I don't do that because I want to keep as many of the genetics together that I can. Once you've had a multiple tank setup going, you can move shrimp to different tanks to isolate them out to get more desired results from the babies. But I've found that in my experience, having a really large colony that's constantly breeding, I can separate the shrimp out when at a more important time for me is going to be the selling time. But like I said, breeding them is pretty simple. As long as you can keep track of the food and make sure that they're eating and keep an eye on them and keep the water changes going and keep the temperature pretty steady around 68, you're going to notice that they just breed like crazy. You don't even have to play any Barry White or anything like that. It actually works out pretty well in our favor. All right, guys, we're moving on to the final section of this video, which would be step 5 is the selling portion. This is probably my favorite part to talk about, but remember, the initial setup in your system, I like to write down how much it costs me out of pocket to get the system up and running. You know, if the tank cost $200, the substrate, the plants, the original shrimp, add those all up and figure out what you're aiming for. That's when this starts to pay off a little bit, because eventually, if you're maintaining your water quality, feeding them properly, running a planted tank, keeping the water parameters legit, they'll be breeding like crazy. And eventually you'll get to the point where you'll be able to start selling some batches off. For me, the easiest way to do it is to take a batch to one of my local fish stores and sell them there, or post an ad on Craigslist. Craigslist has its ups and downs. It's definitely, take it or leave it. It's your opinion whether you want to do that or not. But I do know that one of the best perks to running my favorite animal in a planted tank or in any kind of aquarium is breeding shrimp, is because it ends up costing zero in the long run and ends up paying for itself and making a little bit of money after a while. Most other fish, most other species out there are really not going to pay off in the long run to being able to have paid for the whole system. But crystal shrimp and most of the Neocardinas will pay off in the long run if you're able to keep your strain strong and basically move some of your buddies out to some other tanks and put you in the right position. Well, that's it for this video. Alright, later. Oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.